The road stretched endlessly ahead, the headlights carving a narrow tunnel through the night. My hands rested firmly on the steering wheel, my thumbs tapping absent-mindedly to the soft hum of the radio. The world outside was quiet, too quiet, with only the occasional flicker of trees rushing past. I hadn't seen another car for miles. This was supposed to be good for us. A weekend away from everything, the noise, the routines, the lingering weight of Sarah's absence. She wasn't gone, of course, just away for the weekend out with friends, laughing, unwinding. She deserved that. I told her to go, to enjoy herself. I could handle things. A camping trip with the kids sounded perfect. Fresh air, s'mores, a crackling fire under the stars. Yeah, we needed this. Emily was excited, bouncing in her seat even before we left the driveway, her tiny legs swinging. Ryan didn't complain. That was something. He missed his mom even if he wouldn't say it. I felt it in the way he stared out the window, quiet and distant. Maybe this trip would bring us together again, a chance to feel like a family. The clock on the dash glowed 9:42 p.m. The highway had long since faded into winding back roads, the kind where the trees leaned in too close, branches clawing at the edges of the light. The stars barely peeked through the dense canopy above. I glanced in the rearview mirror, seeing Emily's head bobbing as she fought off sleep. Ryan sat on the opposite side, his hoodie pulled up, eyes lost somewhere in the dark woods outside. Yeah, this was going to be good. We just needed to get there. All right, who's ready for an adventure? I said, forcing my voice to sound lighter than I felt. Emily stirred, mumbling something too soft to hear. Ryan didn't answer. He hadn't said much the whole trip. I sighed, shifting in my seat, and that's when I saw it. A flicker of light appeared between the trees. Too bright, too steady to be a firefly. It hovered, unnaturally still, just beyond the tree line. I blinked, narrowing my eyes. A lantern? Headlights from another car? No. We were in the middle of nowhere. No houses for miles. The light moved, not flickering, not swaying, but gliding smoothly alongside the car, keeping pace. My stomach tightened. My fingers curled tighter around the wheel. It wasn't a light. Not really. It stretched, curving into something thin and sharp, something that looked like teeth. A smile, and it was watching us. I kept my eyes on the road, trying to shake off that feeling in my gut. Whatever it was, I knew it wasn't right. But I couldn't dwell on it. We had made it this far, and the kids needed this trip. It was a fresh start for all of us, even if it was just for the weekend. Eventually, the winding road opened up to a wider stretch of land, and I could see the wooden sign up ahead. Cedarwood Forest Campground, it read. The letters weathered but still visible. A familiar relief washed over me. We'd made it. I pulled the car to a slow stop in front of a small wooden kiosk, where a uniformed officer sat in a folding chair, a clipboard resting in his lap. His eyes were sharp under the brim of his hat, taking in the car and its passengers as I rolled down the window. Evening, I said, trying to sound cheerful. We're here to camp for the weekend. The officer gave me a quick nod, his gaze flicking over to the kids in the back seat, then back to me. $30 for the weekend, sir, he said, his voice firm but polite. It's a cash-only campground, but we've got a nice spot right by the lake. You'll find the parking area just ahead. Just follow the signs to the campgrounds. Enjoy your stay. I pulled out my wallet and handed over the cash, feeling the weight of the night press in on me. The officer gave me a receipt, waved me through, and I rolled up the window, steering the car past the parking area. The parking lot wasn't huge, just a few rows of gravel spaces, each marked with a small weathered sign indicating the campsites. There were a few other cars parked, mostly older models with gear strapped to the roofs, tents and coolers already packed beside them. I parked the car in an empty spot, the headlights illuminating the darkened woods ahead. The air felt crisp, the scent of pine trees filling the space around us. All right, guys, I said, cutting the engine. We're here. Let's get everything out and set up before it gets too dark. Emily's eyes lit up as she unbuckled her seatbelt, her excitement palpable. Yay, I get to sleep in a tent. She shot out of the car before I even had the chance to grab the keys. Ryan didn't say anything at first, but I could see him trying to hide his grin, his green eyes reflecting the excitement. He wasn't one to show too much emotion, but I knew he was looking forward to this trip more than he let on. Come on, Ryan. "Let's get the tent set up," I said, opening the trunk to grab the gear. Yeah, he muttered, but I could hear the enthusiasm behind it. The campsite was peaceful, the gentle rustle of the trees above, the faint sounds of distant wildlife. It was nothing like the city noise we were used to. The kids were in their element, running around and laughing, their voices carrying in the cool night air. We managed to get the first tent set up quickly. Ryan and I worked together, sliding the poles into place, while Emily helped by passing the stakes. She was already talking about what she was going to do the next day, what trail she wanted to hike, what animals she might see. I smiled, tying down the last corner of the tent. "There we go. One tent, all set up," I said, wiping my hands on my jeans. I looked at Emily, then Ryan. They were both grinning, happy, for once completely lost in the joy of being outdoors. "Can I help make the fire?" Emily asked, her hands clasped together. "I want to roast marshmallows." Ryan rolled his eyes playfully but nodded. "Yeah, sure, kid. We'll make the best fire ever," I chuckled, starting to feel that sense of relief creeping in. Maybe, just maybe, this would be the escape we needed. It felt like we were finally beginning to unwind, to shake off everything that had been weighing us down. I stepped back to look at the tents, my kids already making themselves at home in the small space. The night stretched on, and the stars above shimmered brightly, untouched by city lights. A small, satisfying sense of peace settled over me. "Let's get the fire going," I said as I gathered the wood from the pile nearby. "We'll make this a night to remember." And for a while, it felt like everything was exactly as it should be. The night was quiet, save for the occasional crackle of wood as I arranged the logs into the fire pit. The kids were chattering away, gathering sticks and small pieces of kindling to help me get the fire going. Ryan was a little more hesitant with the matches, but Emily was practically bouncing, too eager to wait. I struck the match and held it to the dry kindling. The flames caught quickly, and soon the fire was crackling, casting flickering shadows across our small campsite. The warmth from the fire felt good, especially after the chill of the night air. Emily was already holding out her marshmallow stick, her face lit up by the orange glow of the flames. "I'm gonna roast the perfect marshmallow," she declared, her voice filled with determination. I laughed. "You say that every time. Let's see if you can actually pull it off tonight." Ryan didn't say anything but smirked, pulling out his own stick and skewering a marshmallow. He wasn't one for talking much, but I could see the peace settling in him too. We sat there for a while, the fire's warmth and the quiet of the forest surrounding us, the sound of the crackling fire and the occasional rustle of the trees above were oddly comforting. For a while, everything felt perfect. No distractions, no city noise, just us. The kind of peaceful moment I had been longing for. But then something shifted in the air, a feeling I couldn't quite place. The firelight flickered, casting longer shadows than it should have. And suddenly, I had the eerie sense that we weren't alone. I looked up, my gaze automatically drawn to the edge of the clearing, where the trees started to grow thicker. At first it was just the blackness of the woods, an impenetrable mass of shadows. But then I saw it, a figure. It was far away, standing just at the edge of the forest, barely visible in the distance. But the thing that struck me first was its smile. It was too bright, too wide. It shone through the darkness like it was carved from light itself, cutting through the night like a cruel, mocking mockery of joy. Its eyes, bright and unnaturally white, seemed to pierce through the distance. I could see everything. Its grin, its eyes, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make out the shape of the creature. It was like the shadows themselves were swallowing up the figure, distorting it beyond recognition. My breath caught in my throat and I blinked hard, trying to make sense of it. Was it real? Was it my mind playing tricks on me? The figure didn't move, just stood there grinning. I blinked again, and in that instant it vanished. The clearing was empty once more, the only sound the crackling of the fire. I shook my head, telling myself it was nothing, just the dark woods playing tricks on me. But the unease still clung to me like a second skin. I forced myself to focus back on the fire, to focus on the kids. "Everything all right?" Ryan asked, his voice sharp as if he sensed the sudden shift in my mood. "Yeah, just got a little distracted," I muttered, trying to shake the feeling off. "Nothing to worry about." But I couldn't ignore the knot that had formed in my stomach. The image of that smile, that unnatural grin, lingered in the back of my mind. I shook my head again, forcing myself to focus on the present. Emily was happily toasting her marshmallow, oblivious to the tension that had settled into the air. Ryan, too, seemed fine, poking at the fire with a stick, his expression as casual as ever. But even though the firelight was warm, I couldn't shake the chill that had crawled up my spine. We stayed out there for a while longer, trying to enjoy the moment. But the air felt heavier now, the shadows deeper. The distant woods, once welcoming, now felt suffocating. "All right, guys," I said, my voice more clipped than I intended. "Let's finish up and head inside the tents. We don't want to be out here too late." Emily pouted but nodded, reluctantly pulling her marshmallow away from the fire. "Fine, Daddy, I'll save the rest for tomorrow." Ryan followed suit, tossing his half-eaten marshmallow onto the ground with a flick of his wrist. We doused the fire, stamping out the last of the embers, the air cooling immediately. The night was darker now, the sky overhead almost suffocating in its blackness. "Come on, guys," I said again, more urgently this time, my unease growing stronger. "Let's get inside the tents." We grabbed our things and hurried toward the tents, a palpable tension in the air. I could still feel that strange, unsettling sensation clinging to me, like something wasn't right. But we made it to the tents, the zippered flaps a welcome barrier between us and the vast, empty woods outside. As I tucked Emily into her sleeping bag and Ryan settled into his, the tent felt too small, too closed in. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there. Something that wasn't meant to be seen. Something that was waiting. "Good night, kids," I said, forcing a smile. But even my voice didn't sound as convincing as I wanted it to. "Good night, Dad," Ryan mumbled, his voice already half lost to sleep. "Night, Daddy," Emily whispered, her eyes already fluttering closed. I lay there in the dark, the sounds of the forest all around us, but I couldn't sleep. Every creak, every rustle of the trees made my heart race, and my mind kept replaying the image of that smile, that unnaturally bright grin. Somewhere in the distance, I knew it was still there, waiting. The morning light seeped into the tent through the small cracks in the fabric, casting soft beams across the ground. I woke up first before the kids. My eyes fluttered open, and for a moment I just lay there, listening to the stillness of the woods around us. The air was cool but not cold, the kind of morning where you could breathe deep and feel a crisp freshness in your lungs. Emily was curled up in her sleeping bag, her soft blonde hair falling in waves over the pillow. Her breathing was steady, and I could hear the occasional soft sigh escape her lips. Ryan, too, was still asleep, his sandy hair tousled, and his freckled face peaceful in a way that made me smile. I didn't want to wake them up. Instead, I just lay there for a while, watching them, feeling this odd sense of contentment. But there was something else, something I couldn't quite shake. Creeping sense of unease, like a shadow lingering in the back of my mind, whispering that something wasn't quite right. I rubbed my face with one hand, trying to shake the fogginess from my brain. The weird feeling I had last night still clung to me like a thick fog. That smile, the eyes, the feeling that I wasn't alone out here, even though there was no one around. I shifted slightly, trying not to wake the kids, and pushed the thought away. I didn't want to overthink it. It was probably just the isolation, the woods playing tricks on my mind, the quietness of everything. I had to snap out of it. I slowly unzipped the flap of the tent and stepped out, the cool morning air hitting me as I stood up. I looked out over the clearing, at the small patch of woods beyond. The fog from the night had lifted, but the trees still loomed ominously, their dark shapes reaching up toward the sky. The fire pit from last night was nothing but a pile of ash now, and the camp seemed even quieter than before. I bent down to pick up a stray stick, my hands moving mechanically. As I straightened up, I glanced back at the tent. The kids were still asleep. They looked so peaceful, like nothing could ever hurt them. And that was the thing that made me feel off. How could something that peaceful and perfect exist in the middle of such a strange, unsettling place? I tried to shake it off again, focusing on the present. I leaned against a nearby tree, my fingers tracing the rough bark as I stared into the distance. But then, just like the night before, that nagging feeling returned. The words I'd said yesterday, while driving, how everything was fine, how the trip was going great, how the kids were excited as it didn't sit right. My voice still echoed in my mind. and it felt rehearsed, like something I had said before, over and over again. But I couldn't remember when. I let out a quiet sigh and turned back toward the tent. The kids were still asleep. I almost wanted to let them sleep in, give them the extra time to rest before we started the day. But a part of me couldn't shake the thought that something was wrong, something beyond the usual fatherly concerns, something deeper, something I couldn't explain. As I stood there lost in thought, I found myself staring at the trees once more. The woods were still and silent, as though holding their breath. I couldn't help but feel that at any moment, something was going to break the stillness. The woods were alive, yes, but there was something unnatural about it. It wasn't the peaceful kind of alive. It was a quiet, waiting kind of alive. My hand twitched, and I realized I had been standing there too long. I needed to focus on the kids, on the trip. I was their dad. I was supposed to be their protector. I couldn't let my mind wander like this. I took one last deep breath and started to head back toward the tent. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a flicker, something moving in the distance. The trees shifted, but it wasn't wind. I stopped dead in my tracks. For just a second, I thought I saw a figure, a shape just at the edge of my vision. I blinked quickly, but it was gone. I rubbed my eyes. What was going on with me? Maybe it was just the fog of sleep or the strange feeling that had been hanging over me since last night. But that wasn't the point. The point was, something wasn't right. I shook my head and walked back to the tent, trying to clear my thoughts. When I unzipped the door and crawled inside, the smell of damp earth and fabric hit me. The kids were still sound asleep. Emily's soft snores filled the quiet space, and Ryan's face was buried in the pillow. His body curled up like a little ball. I sat on the ground next to them, staring at their peaceful faces. I couldn't help but smile at how innocent they looked, but the smile didn't reach my eyes. I could feel the weight of something pressing on me, something I couldn't explain. I wanted to say something, to shake the feeling off, but instead, I just sat there, watching, waiting, trying to ignore the nagging voice in my head, telling me that something was wrong, that I had missed something, that my words from yesterday, the driving, the laughter, everything, they didn't belong. I wasn't sure what I was doing anymore, but I couldn't leave. I couldn't shake the idea that something was watching us, waiting for us to make the next move. I just hoped I was wrong. The sun was already high in the sky when I finally made my way back into the tent. The kids were still sound asleep, curled up together like they didn't have a care in the world. I smiled at the sight, how innocent they looked. How easy it seemed for them to just slip into peaceful dreams. I stretched my arms overhead, feeling the crisp morning air through the fabric of the tent. It was time to start the day. I didn't want to rush them, but I also wanted to make the most of the trip. I crouched down beside Emily, gently brushing a few stray hairs from her face. "Hey, princess," I whispered, my voice soft but firm enough to rouse her from her sleep. "Time to wake up." Emily stirred, blinking her bright blue eyes as she slowly woke up. A small smile spread across her face when she saw me. "Morning, Daddy," she mumbled, her voice still thick with sleep. Ryan was harder to wake. His messy brown hair was tangled in a way that made him look even younger than his 10 years. I nudged him, shaking him gently by the shoulder. "Hey, bud, time to get up." He groaned, rubbing his eyes with the back of his hand. "Do we have to?" I chuckled softly. "Yeah, we have to. But guess what? We've got a whole day ahead of us. We're gonna have fun today." That seemed to do the trick. Ryan let out a half yawn, half laugh, and sat up, rubbing his eyes. "What are we doing?" I grinned, already knowing what I wanted to do next. "How about a game of hide and seek?" I suggested, my voice carrying an excitement I hoped they would catch. Emily jumped up instantly. "Yes, let's do it. Can I hide first?" Ryan nodded enthusiastically. "I'll find you, Emily. You'll never get away from me." I laughed, shaking my head. All right. Let's get outside. We'll start fresh in the woods." We crawled out of the tent and into the cool morning air. The woods stretched out before us, vast and inviting. The trees were thick, and I knew the kids would have a blast running around, playing their games in the open space. "Okay, Emily, you're up first," I said. "You hide and Ryan and I will count." Emily didn't hesitate. She darted off, already trying to find the perfect hiding spot, her blonde hair bouncing behind her. Ryan counted loudly, his voice echoing through the woods. 1, 2, 3. I grinned as Emily disappeared behind a large tree, her giggle barely audible. Ryan and I exchanged a look, both of us trying to stifle our laughter as we began to search for her. The day was filled with games, tag, racing, and more hide and seek. The kids were full of energy, laughing and shouting as they ran through the woods, their voices carrying through the air. The sounds of their joy made the woods feel less foreboding, less strange. For a while, I could almost forget the nagging feeling I'd had earlier. By the time the sun started to dip beneath the trees, we were all worn out, our faces flushed from running around. I led them back to the campfire, where we settled down and made our dinner. Simple hot dogs and marshmallows, roasted over the fire. The smell of sizzling food mixed with the fresh scent of the woods. And for a moment, everything felt normal. After dinner, we all sat around the fire, the flames crackling and dancing in the night air. The sky was clear, the stars twinkling above, and the moon hung low, casting an eerie glow over the camp. The kids looked content, tired but happy, their eyes wide as they gazed into the fire. "All right," I said, wiping my hands on my pants. "It's getting late. Time to get ready for bed." Emily groaned but nodded. "Do we have to?" I nodded. "We'll have another fun day tomorrow, but it's important to get some sleep." We got everything settled, the tent zipped up for the night, and the kids snuggled into their sleeping bags. They were both still full of energy, their excitement from the day not quite ready to fade. "Can you tell us a bedtime story, Daddy?" Emily asked, her voice soft but hopeful. Ryan nodded, his eyes already starting to droop. "Please, Dad," I chuckled, sitting down on the edge of their sleeping bags. I had a lot of stories to choose from, but something about this moment felt right for an old classic. "All right, how about Romeo and Juliet?" I said. They both perked up, intrigued by the idea of a love story. I wasn't sure if they fully understood the depth of it, but I figured it might be fun to share. "Once upon a time," I began, my voice lowering to a soothing tone. "There were two families, the Montagues and the Capulets. They hated each other, like really hated each other. And then one night at a big party, two of their children, Romeo and Juliet, met. I could see their faces light up as I began the tale. I told them the story of forbidden love, of how Romeo and Juliet fell for each other at first sight, their love defying the long-standing feud between their families. I skipped over the darker parts, the tragedy of the ending, but focused on the pure connection between the two. Romeo and Juliet couldn't be together," I said, my voice heavy with emotion. "But they still fought for their love. They tried to make it work, even when the world didn't want them to. And even though they didn't get the happy ending they deserved, their love was remembered for all time." As I finished the story, I looked down at Emily and Ryan. They were both asleep, their faces peaceful, their bodies curled into their sleeping bags. I smiled softly, tucking the blanket tighter around them. I glanced toward the entrance of the tent, my thoughts drifting again to the woods outside. The feeling of being watched, of something lurking just beyond the trees, crept back into my mind, but I pushed it aside, focusing on the warmth of the fire and the peaceful breaths of my children. I had to believe everything was fine. I had to. I woke up in the middle of the night, my body stiff with tension, my eyes snapping open as I heard it, the sound that didn't belong. At first I couldn't place it. A low wheel, distant but unmistakable. It wasn't the usual wildlife noises of the forest. It was a long, drawn-out sound, almost animalistic. But there was something off about it. It didn't belong here. It seemed to pierce through the silence, eerie and unnatural. A second wheel joined the first, then another, until they all merged into a horrible, rhythmic cacophony. The more I heard it, the more it felt like a warning, like the creatures of the forest were trying to tell me something. The noise was growing louder, more frantic, as if something was moving. Something large, something that didn't belong. A chill ran down my spine, and I instinctively pulled the blanket tighter around me, my heart pounding in my chest. Suddenly, a gust of wind howled through the trees, shaking the tent, making the branches creak as though something was forcing its way through the woods. The wheeling noises stopped for a brief moment, leaving only the whisper of the wind. But the eerie quiet that followed was worse. It was as though everything had gone still, waiting. I slowly sat up, trying to calm my breathing, but my skin prickled with a strange cold sweat. There was something outside, something that made the forest feel wrong, something that was lurking just beyond the shadows. And then in the silence that followed, I heard the sound again, a wheel sharper this time, closer, almost as if it was coming from right outside my tent. My body tensed. I wasn't sure whether it was my imagination, running wild, or if something truly was out there. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was watching me, waiting for the right moment to make itself known. I lay there in the dark, my mind racing. The strange wheeling sounds from outside seemed to echo through my skull, and every time they paused, I felt as though something was getting closer. It felt like the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. With my heart pounding, I slowly reached for the zipper of the tent. My fingers trembled as I unzipped it just a bit, trying not to make any noise. I peered out into the blackness. At first I saw nothing, but then something caught my eye in the corner of my vision. Something tall, something unnatural. A towering figure standing just beyond the reach of the firelight. It was massive, easily 12 feet tall, its form a void of pure darkness. It absorbed all the light around it, making the air around it feel colder, heavier. Its body was featureless, a silhouette that seemed to bend and stretch in the shadows. The creature's arms hung unnaturally low, down to its knees and its fingers. They were twisted, gnarled, like broken branches of some ancient tree. Its hair was blacker than the night itself, so dark it seemed to suck in the light around it. But the worst part wasn't its size or its form. No, it was the eyes. Those eyes, stark white sclera with pitch-black pupils locked onto mine. And I felt a shiver run through me that had nothing to do with the cold. It was the smile, the grin. It was impossibly bright, glowing in the dark like a cruel mockery of light. It sliced through the night, too wide, too bright, and it never wavered. The creature just stood there. Its head tilted slightly as it stared at me, its grin never faltering. It wasn't moving, just watching. I could feel my heart racing in my chest, my throat closing up. Fear crawled up my spine, cold and unrelenting. I snapped the zipper shut, nearly panicking as I quickly backed away from the tent opening. My breath came in shallow gasps, my body trembling with adrenaline. I could feel a sense of terror rising in me, like I was suffocating. I glanced over at my kids, Emily and Ryan, still sound asleep in their sleeping bags, oblivious to the nightmare outside. How could they not sense it? How could they sleep through this? I forced myself to calm down, but my mind was screaming. I had to get us out of here. I had to leave. But I couldn't think straight, not yet. I needed to wake them, get them moving. Hey, kids! Wake up, we need to go. It's time to leave, I whispered urgently, my voice hoarse. Emily stirred first, blinking sleepily at me, her expression confused. Dad, what's going on? Why are we leaving? Ryan groggily sat up, rubbing his eyes. What happened, Dad? Why do we have to go? I forced a smile, even though my stomach was tied in knots. There's been a change of plans. It's time to head home. We need to leave now, okay? I said, trying to sound normal, but I knew I was failing. My voice was too sharp, too panicked. Emily tilted her head, eyes narrowing slightly as she studied me. Dad, why do you look so scared? I froze, not knowing how to answer her. My heart was pounding too hard in my chest, my thoughts spinning too fast. I couldn't even bring myself to tell her the truth. Instead, I reached for the zipper again, my hands trembling. I unzipped it just a bit, just enough to peek outside, and it was gone. The creature was no longer there. I shoved my shoes on, fumbling with the laces as I tied them tightly. Hurry up, kids, I called. They quickly bent down, hands smoothing the laces, each pair aligned with careful precision, as they slipped their shoes on without a word. But I didn't wait. I didn't hesitate. My heart leaped into my throat and I grabbed the kids, pulling them to their feet. Come on, we're leaving now, I said, my voice trembling. I didn't care that everything was still packed up, that we hadn't finished everything. All I knew was that we had to go, and we had to go fast. The moment I zipped the tent closed behind us, I led them into the night, not daring to look back. I didn't care what was left behind. I didn't care about anything but getting us out of the woods, away from whatever was out there watching us. The air felt thick with dread, like the forest itself was holding us in its grip, unwilling to let go. The silence was deafening as I urged my kids forward, my own fear gnawing at me, pushing me to move faster. Something was still out there, something that wanted to hurt us. And I had to get us to safety before it found us again. As we ran, the strange noises intensified. At first, it was just the wind rustling through the trees. But then came the sounds, the eerie, unnatural sounds. It was as if the entire forest had come alive. Dogs barking, sharp and frantic, pierced the air. But then it wasn't just dogs. Birds began to shriek and chirp, their calls frantic, overlapping with the barking. Owls hooted in the distance, their voices echoing through the woods, but it wasn't normal. It was all happening at once, in a chaotic symphony of animal sounds. And each noise seemed to be getting closer, closer, as if something, or someone was chasing us through the dark. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating as I pushed the kids forward. They stumbled behind me, their legs tired, but I couldn't slow down. We had to keep moving. I was focusing on the ground, watching every step, dodging roots and rocks, my feet pounding against the uneven terrain. The trees blurred past me in the dark, their gnarled branches reaching out like claws. But I didn't have time to look up. I had to keep my eyes trained on the path, on where my feet landed. Stay close, I shouted over my shoulder, trying to keep my voice steady. But it came out sharp, panicked. Emily and Ryan were right behind me, but I could hear them breathing heavily, their feet slapping against the forest floor, trying to match my pace. I heard Ryan trip, his feet catching on something, but he managed to keep his balance. "Come on," I urged, not daring to turn around. The animal noises were getting louder, closer. The barking sounded like it was directly behind us, the yelps echoing in the stillness of the night. And then there was the flurry of bird calls, more intense now, frantic, desperate, like they were being hunted too. The wind seemed to pick up, whistling through the trees, and every branch seemed to snap underfoot as I raced past them. "Faster!" I urged, my own breath coming in ragged gasps. I could hear my heart thundering in my chest, and the fear was suffocating. It wasn't just the animals, it was the feeling, the unmistakable sense that we were being watched, that something or someone was trailing us, just out of sight but closing in with every passing second. The path was narrowing now, and I had to duck under branches and dodge low-hanging limbs. The forest around me was alive with the sounds of chaos. Dogs barking, birds screeching, owls hooting. It was all blending together into a maddening cacophony that seemed to follow us, pulling us deeper into the woods. I glanced back once, just a quick glance, and saw nothing but darkness. But I could feel it. Something was out there, something chasing us. I could hear the kids breathing hard now, Emily's voice trembling. "Dad, what's happening? Why are we running?" I didn't have an answer. I couldn't even form a coherent thought. I just knew that we had to keep going. We couldn't stop. We couldn't look back. Every step felt like it was taking us farther from safety. But the noise, the unnerving chaos of the forest, it was closing in. It was as if the entire world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. But all I could do was run. Run and keep running. We stumbled out of the woods, breathless and panicked, crashing through the underbrush, desperate to find any kind of safety. And there it was, the familiar building, the one where we had paid to get into the woods, where we had seen the security guard earlier. It loomed in the distance, the light from a single overhead lamp flickering in the haze of the night. We rushed toward it, and as we neared the entrance, I saw the security guard sitting in his chair, his feet kicked up on the desk. He was still there, calm, unaware of the terror that had been stalking us. I could barely catch my breath, my chest tight with panic as I approached him. "You've got to help us!" "Something's out there, something wrong," I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. The security guard looked up slowly, his expression unchanging. He didn't move for a moment, just stared at me as though I had lost my mind. Then he shifted in his seat and scratched his chin. "Look, buddy, it's late and we get all kinds of stories around here. People see things in the woods all the time. You just need to calm down, all right?" His nonchalance made my stomach twist into knots. I could feel the fear rising in my chest again, burning through me. "No, you don't understand. There's something out there, something following us. Please, you have to help us." But the guard just shook his head, unbothered. All right. I'm sure you've had a rough night, but it's just wildlife. Maybe you should head back to your car and get some rest." His dismissal was like a slap in the face. I felt a surge of frustration, of helplessness. The last thing I wanted to do was argue with this guy. He didn't believe us, and that only made it worse. Without thinking, I grabbed the kids by the hands. "Let's go," I muttered under my breath, barely able to get the words out. We didn't have time to explain. We didn't have time for anyone's doubts. We turned away and ran for the car. My mind was racing, my heart pounding. We had to get out of here. I fumbled with the keys, panic clouding my every move. My hands were shaking, my vision blurry as I tried to unlock the car. I could hear the security guard's voice calling after us, but I didn't care. I couldn't stay there. Not with what we had seen. Finally, the door clicked open. I shoved the kids in, slammed the door shut, and started the engine. My hands were still shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. But I didn't stop to think. I floored the accelerator, speeding away from the woods, from the nightmare that had followed us. We drove in silence, my kids silent in the back seat. It felt like hours, but it couldn't have been more than a few minutes before I saw the familiar roads of home, 3 hours away. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the weight of everything came crashing down on me. It was still dark, still night, just like when we had left. But the silence of home felt like a relief. I could feel my heart rate slowing, the tension in my muscles starting to release, even though the terror was still lodged deep in my chest. We were safe. We had made it home. But as I sat there in the car, staring at the darkened house, the unease didn't leave. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there. Something we had narrowly escaped. Something I didn't want to think about. But we were home. That was all that mattered for now. I sat on the couch, exhausted, my body still tense from the terror we had just experienced. My daughter, still unable to shake off what had happened, quietly ate her cereal at the table. It was well past 3:02 a.m., and she hadn't been able to sleep since we got back. Then I heard it, the faint sound of keys jingling, the unmistakable noise of the door unlocking. I froze, sitting upright, my heart suddenly racing. It was a sound I knew all too well. My wife had returned. I'd called her earlier, telling her everything that had happened, and she must have hurried home. The door creaked open, and she stepped inside, closing it behind her. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. She looked at me concerned. "What happened?" she asked as she walked in, eyes searching my face for answers. I opened my mouth, ready to explain, but the words came out haltingly. I tried to tell her what we had seen, how something in the woods had been following us. Something with an eerie, glowing smile. I spoke about the security guard, about the terrifying creature that had been standing outside our tent, its features unnatural and horrifying. But she didn't believe me. "Come on, honey," she said gently, clearly trying to calm me. "It was probably just the dark. You've had a rough night, that's all. It's okay." But the last thing I heard before everything went silent was my daughter's trembling voice looking out the window. "Daddy, there's a smiling man outside."